We don't have to dig very far to find parts of ourselves that are inconsistent with who we think we are, or the person we want to become, or the person that we project out into the world. What's the antidote? What's the answer to that? Hi, I'm Warren, the rector here at St. Columba's. Glad you could join me for my message of the day. Last week I talked about the more subtle and dangerous kind of hypocrisy. That's the hypocrisy when we don't like something about ourselves, so we compensate by not being that person. I'm not going to be that person. So the more we do that, the greater the disconnect between who we are trying to be and who we fear we really are. At its worst, this fear of who we might be, or active dislike of who we know we are, can lead to all kinds of behaviours designed to shield us from that, and designed to strengthen who we want to be, or who we project out into the world. That's the person we really are. But again, strengthening the disconnection. Or maybe we hide from the disconnection, those parts of us that we don't really like, by pointing the finger at other people, being critical of them. But that's the problem. Of course, the more successful we are in not being who we fear we really are, the more alienated we become from our true self. And at a minimum, that takes a great deal of energy, psychic and spiritual. I began the reflection last week on hypocrisy with the observation that I have met people that say the church is full of hypocrites, with the implication that they themselves aren't hypocrites and therefore wouldn't want to associate with us. I suppose people who have an ideal to live up to, like Christians, leave themselves open to the accusation of being hypocrites, of course. Although in some ways perhaps there is something to say about trying to live to an ideal and failing rather than having no ideals. But yes, Christians, like everyone, can try to justify themselves through all sorts of virtue signalling, or justify themselves by pointing out to others their imperfections. But while that does apply to Christians, it seems to me to be true mainly because it applies to almost all of us. But I have a sneaking suspicion that there's another reason lurking beneath the surface that makes people use the "they're all hypocrites" as a reason not to come to church. And that's the fear that it is easier to criticise others as hypocrites than to confront one's own fears of personal hypocrisy. It's obvious, really. Hypocrisy lurks in us all. And to lump a whole group of people together as a bunch of hypocrites has the smell of self-justification to me. I think a better way is to assume the danger of hypocrisy within all of us, especially the subtle kind that I'm talking about. So it's better to let the hypocrisy we see in others be an occasion to realise that it probably lurks in us as well. So instead of scapegoating other people as hypocrites, what's the answer to the hypocrisy that potentially lives in each of us? Well, remember that what we're talking about is the denial of who we think we might be, or there's a sneaking suspicion that we're not quite who we say we are. We're not quite who we want to be. We're not quite that person that has to do or think certain things to be acceptable. I might not be quite as good or whatever as I think I am. The fear that there is more to me, and a negative more than I'm willing to face. This is the root of hypocrisy. So in response to this realisation, I suppose someone could go and find a good counsellor at $200 or more an hour and gently but persistently come to grips with their fears about themselves. Alternatively, you could come to church. God already knows who we are. There's no hiding from God. But God's voice is not the critical and fearful voice that we might hear in ourselves. Let the gentle voice of the good news of forgiveness and renewal do its work in you. It's free. And you join a community of people, the church, who are all too aware of the dangers of hypocrisy and the danger inherent in denying the bits of ourselves that we are embarrassed about. But it is the presence of accepting love, God's accepting love, which when you come to church you'll hear through the liturgy, the scriptures, the singing, the preaching, and through the acceptance by others in our mutual acknowledgement of our imperfections. It is these things and more that can bring us to be reconciled to ourselves and to find our true selves in that forgiveness and presence. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.